Hello and welcome to In Ink We Trust, a tattoo and art culture in San Fernando Valley. I'm your host, Anthony Sanchez. Today we're going to talk to Dr. Erin J. Hayes. Thank you very much for coming by the studio.
Anytime.
Great. So Dr. Hayes, let's begin. Tell us about yourself, where you're from, and your career in anthropology.
Okay. So I'm a cultural anthropologist. Anthropology has 4 fields, and they can focus on anything from skeletal and human structures to culture and language, and I focus on culture. I'm originally from San Diego, so not too far from here, but I've always been interested in culture, and I studied Latin American studies in my undergrad, and then I went into Peace Corps after I graduated. Then I came back and worked with refugees, and then I went on to a PhD in cultural anthropology, sort of as a way to apply that interest in culture and to kind of get a better understanding for how different cultures work and, you know, how to work with and understand different perspectives around the world.
Great. So we're going to talk broadly about tattoo culture. Mm-hmm. So I want to maybe start with, what do you think, or what does anthropology know about tattoos?
Yeah, so I'm no tattoo expert. I teach cultural anthropology in general, but one of the areas that it fits within is body modification, which is an area of interest in anthropology. And body modification can be anything from tattooing to changing your clothes to wearing makeup, any of those things. Cutting body parts off, you know, adding things onto your body, those kinds of things. And so tattooing is kind of a subsection within that. And then there's kind of like 2 areas within that. You can look at colored tattooing, or you can look at scarification. And you tend to see color tattooing on lighter skinned peoples around the world, and you tend to see scarification, which is non-ink, with darker skinned people around the world. And scarification is where it's not flat to the skin, but there's a bump created to show the image. And the bump is created through cutting. And then usually it involves putting some kind of ash or something inside the skin that heals over it. So it creates kind of a texture to the skin.
Okay, great. Interesting. I didn't even know about that thing. So let's see. Why do we think humans use tattoo in their cultures? We think that humans, even pre-Homo sapiens, have been modifying themselves in one way or another for hundreds of thousands of years, decorating themselves, painting themselves. Of course, you know, with ancient humans, we don't have any direct evidence because we don't have their skin around, but we do have the oldest kind of evidence of human tattooing goes back to Ötzi, who is really kind of the oldest mummified frozen person who's about 5,500 years old, and he has tattoos on his body. Again, it's all part of this effort for humans to express themselves, but particularly anthropologists think that we modify and tattoo in order to show several things. So first of all, it can be a form of membership in a particular community. It shows that I am Igbo or something like that. You know, you belong to a particular culture or community. Secondly, it oftentimes shows a status in a person's life. So maybe they've attained adulthood and they'll get some sort of marker. Maybe they've become a warrior and that's some sort of marker, something like that. So those are going to be the 2 main reasons. But other reasons are also going to include beauty. You know, we appreciate it and it's artistic and beautiful. And also healing, health and healing. So a lot of cultures will believe that there's a spiritual connection between tattooing and physical healing. Yeah. Well, we're going to come back to that, spiritual healing, some of those topics. I guess the first thing that I want to jump into in relation to that is, for our modern audiences, what do you think? And I know you're not specializing in this, so this will probably be, I'm asking you outside, maybe even your personal opinion. What do you think modern cultures do with their different tattooing now and compared to thousands of years ago?
Yeah, you know, in a way, I think it's the same. You know, we have the same kind of basic motivations, which is to show either our individuality or our membership in a group, right? So that's not different from ancient people.
that's the same, but the way that we express it might be a little bit different today. Or in a lot of ways, actually, tattooing, body modification, all of that draws on ancient forms. So we can see some elements of that in modern tattooing. But I think modern tattooing is really interesting because so many cultures around the world, it is really about being a part of a group. And I think a lot of times with modern tattooing, people want to be individuals. They want to have a name, or they want to have a picture of somebody they know, or something that's very unique to them. They don't want to have the same tattoo as everybody else, right? Whereas a lot of times in other cultures, you do want to have the same tattoo because that shows that you're this thing, right? So I do think it's a little bit different in that way. But also, oddly enough, in having a unique tattoo, it still shows that you're a part of tattoo community in general. So it is another form of membership, just in a particular kind of a community.
Right. I guess this will be a good time for me to even step out of my interviewer role and share that, when I meet other tattooers, that there's a sense of, oh, how long did you sit in the chair? Did you do this? Did you do that? And there is a hierarchy. I can tell you that much.
And what do you mean by hierarchy? I'm interested.
Where you have more tattoos, if you got a tattoo here or there, how painful it was, There's
that's the kind of information you share when you meet somebody?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Often.
Yeah, because, that really does make it its own community, because anthropologists look for shared language, shared experience, and, a way to connect. And clearly tattoo does that for people.
Right. Do you have any tattoos?
I don't. I'm a wuss.
Is that something that you would be interested in someday?
I kind of go in and out of the phase, but I think I'm afraid of that level of commitment. I haven't found anything that I want to commit to that right. strongly. So,
if you were to get one, what would you get?
I don't really know. That's a good question. I mean, I'd want something individual and personal to me and my family, I think. I think I love the tribal designs are beautiful, but then I also feel like, I don't have a personal connection to that, so I don't think I would do that, even though I like the way they look. So I don't know. Again, I haven't found something that says, oh, I want that on me forever, so I don't know.
Right. So we'll go back to a little bit to what you touched upon. Why do you think humans need to memorialize things like rites of passage, death, marriage? You said, that they do these modifications and stuff. So why, at least from your studies, do you feel that that's a thing?
Important to people, yeah. What anthropologists say about humans is that we're symbolic animals. So we use symbols in the way that animals don't, right? We have a lot in common with animals. We're very similar to them. But the thing that we do that they don't do is really live or die by our symbols. Our culture is made up of symbols. Our language is made up of symbols. And we think via our symbols. And so I think that tattooing is, at its very basis, a symbol, and humans need that form of expression because, again, if you're not a part of a group, you die. You need to belong somewhere. You need to know who you are. You need to know how to behave. And so tattooing sends messages, and it's about communication. It's about connecting. And so for, I think, all humans, that kind of symbolic expression is key to who we are as animals, and as people.
You said that some of your research dealt with Latin American cultures. So did you see any tattooing in that culture that you could touch upon with that maybe get more specific, since we've been talking so broadly so far?
I don't think so. But again, it wasn't really my focus. I don't recall anything in particular in Latin America. I mean, I know different examples of tattooing from all over the world. And there's tattooing in indigenous communities in the Amazon basin. And I did go to some of those communities, but I didn't learn particularly about their tattooing.
I guess it's a good time for me to bring up that there's Laura Krutak, who's a tattoo anthropologist. And I guess because I'm hearing that you didn't investigate the tattoos, if I'm hearing this right, because you're looking for a language. And I know that's something that his interest is. So I guess we'll come back to that. But you said that there are different cultures that do tattooing. So do you remember at least briefly what some
examples?
Yeah, some examples.
Yeah. So let's see. So amongst, in many cultures, actually, tattooing is a rite of passage to becoming an adult. And so, for example, we'll include scarification with this because that would be a form of tattooing without ink. In Benin, they practice a cutting form, which is really decorative, but the children have their faces scarred when they're weaned from their moms. And then when they become adults, their abdomen and chest are scarred. And the purpose is to show, that you have the strength and fortitude and will to be a courageous adult. Or in Sudan, they also scarify themselves across the forehead. They'll do deep cuts, and this is amongst the Dinka and the Nuer. They'll do deep cuts across the forehead that cut into the bone, actually, as a form of membership. So each sub-tribe has a different pattern, and you do this when you're becoming an adult because it shows you're a full member of that tribe. And it cuts to the bone because, of course, when you're dead, you still belong somewhere. Other actual kind of image tattooing, the Maori practice image tattooing, and they're kind of famous for having their faces tattooed and all this. And this is kind of like warrior mask and imagery. In the South Pacific and Micronesia, they do a lot of tattooing over there. In Borneo, they do a form of tattooing that shows somebody who's taken a head and gone headhunting. So actually, there's a number of communities in the South Pacific that will mark either headhunting or a death or having killed somebody. So it's a form of kind of marking that death. So it may either be a form of marking that you're a successful headhunter, or it might show that you've killed somebody. In many places, actually in the South Pacific too, a number of cultures will scarify themselves in the pattern of animals. So, for example, in this particular tribe in Papua New Guinea, they will do a scarification that has raised bumps that looks actually sort of like reptile skin. And the reason that they do that is because they believe that they descended from an alligator. And so this is a rite of passage into adulthood. But it also recalls, their belief system, their mythology that they descended from an alligator. So in a weird way, this particular tribe does not believe that children are full humans because they can't speak very well and they don't participate fully in the cultural practices. And so going through this rite of passage, you leave childhood and you leave your animalism behind, right?
Right.
And then you mark yourself to show where you came from. Right. So not only do they believe they descended from the alligator, but they show that they've left their animalism behind in the process.
Right. That's very fascinating. I guess I'll jump to a silly question. Do you think that tattoos could, or do you believe in magic or the protection or those type of things? I mean, as somebody who's maybe scientific, I guess, because this is something you touched about, that they get it for protection, warriors. What's your thoughts on that?
I teach a class called Magic, Witchcraft, and Religion. And so, of course, we talk about these kinds of things in there. I personally think that, belief has a strong influence over our health and well-being. So if you believe that it works, I do believe that it has an influence over your health and well-being. Personally, yeah. So I would say yes.
Because I understand that some of the cultures do it like as a love potion or things like that.
Yeah.
So, because you said that tattooing sometimes is for beauty purposes, right?
It can be, yeah.
So I guess we'll go back to Lars Kritak, and this one's more of a lofty thing to talk about. He said that tattoo art is a visual language, and that there's a need to document this language. So what are some ways that anthropologists document cultures? Like, for example, he uses photography.
I think that would be the main one for tattooing, for sure. But, I mean, Cultural anthropology's main method is field work, which means that we have to spend long periods of time in the communities that we're studying, years, not just weeks, but years. And so it would be photography, but it would also be recording the oral narratives and histories of people, which explain the tattoos, right? It puts them in a context. It would be, maybe promoting the preservation of and support for elderly people in the community who actually are the tattooists, who are the last ones who know the practice, right? So they would advocate to governments and say, you need to fund a program to kind of support these people. So they can be advocates, they can be documenters, they can be researchers. But because we spend such a long time in the communities that we study, we oftentimes become highly involved with our subjects. We don't have any of that. We don't pretend to have any of that objective scientific outsider perspective because, these are humans and so are we. And so we will advocate for them. We will ask communities what it is that they want, So if the community has said, we don't care about tattooing anymore, then the anthropologist has to respect that too, But many times communities do want to preserve their identity through kind of that preservation method, those preservation methods.
Great. So I'm going to have a lot of tattoo artists in the show in the future. Mm-hmm. So if you were studying tattoo artists, what kind of questions as an anthropologist would you be asking them?
That's a good question.
I'm like, can you do my homework for me?
Exactly. I would definitely be curious. I mean, as an anthropologist, I just want to know people's origin stories, so I'd want to know how they got involved in tattooing. I would want to know what it is in particular that the symbol means to them, and then how do they connect with those people that they're tattooing. So maybe the person has a design, or maybe they developed a design for the person, or maybe they just have a Tasmanian devil and it's the standard one or whatever. But is the tattooing a form of connection with human, and if so, how? I'd be really interested in that kind of thing. And is it like a permanent connection? Do you feel like you're a part of that person still, or do you have some connection with those people that you've tattooed in the past? And what does it symbolically mean to the tattooist?
Right. Yeah, I could hear both those. I think some of those, sometimes people get, some of those questions will be answered by the people that get the tattoos, mm-hmm. or some of those are questions that the tattoo artists. And I have a similar question about, is there kind of like a shaman or, being passed down? Because mm-hmm. it's a little different. Like you said, the older cultures had been passing it down, and sometimes those traditions are dying off. Whereas here, at least in the Western cultures, if I'm correct, it's kind of just apprenticeships and then it moves on. Mm-hmm. I know you had a question earlier about my tattoo. Mm-hmm. So I guess I should share my story for a bit. I have a sleeve on my left arm that we spent about 3 years working on. Worked with the artist, gave him some different images to work with, and then collaborated on it over a year before we put the first piece down. On the lower half of my arm is a phoenix, so to symbolize rising from the ashes. And then out of that comes the Buddha of Compassion. And then there's also a Gustav Klimt underneath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Again, that was something that
Beautiful.
Becoming comfortable with my sexuality, comfortable with, loving people even if they've hurt me or those type of things. So I don't know if that answers some of your questions. Or
yeah, I have a question. Yeah. So as you said, it took you a year before you even put anything down.
Yes.
Did it change in the process of that collaboration?
Not particularly from what I remember, because it was quite a while back. Mm-hmm. I feel like the only things that maybe changed were how we were positioning. I originally thought that the tattoo would just be on my inner forearm, mm-hmm. and then it kind of just turned into a bigger piece. And mm-hmm. some of that is from my experience I could share with tattoo artists. I have a few other tattoos, but this is the most symbolic one. They like to get a lot of detail in there. So they like the image to be larger. Mm-hmm. If it's too small, it's just they can only do so much.
Yeah, I see. That makes sense. Yeah. And a question for you then also for me would be, why tattoo? Why on your skin? Like, if you can create a beautiful image, why should it be on your skin? And why
I do
for
love
you?
art, and I was very particular about choosing this artist. And let me hear again, why on my skin specifically? The things that I'd been up to this point, I'm 40, were very like part of my person. So it's like a rite of passage. If there was like a moment where it was like, I want to remember these tragedies that I'd been through and how to kind of march through them in the future. So whenever I have a moment of weakness or a moment of uncertainty, I can look at that and remind myself, like, I've been through this before. I can get through this again.
So then to me that sounds like almost a healing practice. I don't know if you would call it that, but I mean, it means something to you that you can draw upon for strength. Is that correct?
Yeah. As well as like above my chest, there's a love my enemy. So to remind myself that kind of thing. And then some of them are more random. Like I have on my right forearm, when David Bowie passed away, it really affected me. So I put the symbol from his last album, the Black Star, there. So I wouldn't normally brand myself, is what I'd call it. But I did find it interesting that it just really deeply affected me. And I guess his music really helped form my identity when I was a teenager, helped me understand that it was okay to be queer and that you can transcend those type of things. So, and he's a symbol for my generation, and I'm sure maybe yours as well. So that was a really important thing. On the back of my neck is a Norse tattoo. So yeah.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers some of your questions there.
Yeah.
Shared a little bit of myself, which I think is a good way to introduce the show as well, so people know. I'm not just sitting here just making up stuff. Well, I am.
Don't we all?
Yeah. So I want to again thank you for being here. It's been great talking to you. Want to find out what are some of the upcoming things? You have some other classes coming up in the future. Do you know what you're teaching next semester?
I do, yeah. So I teach, let's see. In the summer, I'm going to teach cultural anthropology, and this is one of the topics in there. We just briefly touch on it because this is a big area. We touch on this topic actually much more in Magic, Witchcraft, and Religion, which is Anthropology 121. And sometimes I teach that and sometimes I don't. I'm not scheduled soon, unfortunately. I love that class. It's fun. But I'll be teaching Anthropology 102, which is cultural. I teach also Linguistic Anthropology, which is Anthro 161. And then sometimes I think, I don't know if I'll be teaching it or not, actually. I might be teaching Physical Anthropology, which is 101.
Nice. Okay. And Dr. Hayes, what if anybody has any questions for you, they can email you. Again, your email is hayesej@piercecollege.edu.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you again, Dr. Hayes. For more info, you can go on kpcradio.com, and to follow the show on Instagram and Twitter, it's at IN1NK We Trust. Coming up on our next show, we have guests from Clandestine Rabbit in Tarzana. Thank you all for listening. I'm Anthony Sanchez. I hope you join me next week.